In the shadows of Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, Anne Frank documents her hidden life in a secret annex. Through her diary, she shares the fears of hiding, the struggles of growing up, and her enduring belief in human goodness. Though her life was tragically cut short, her words live on, a voice of hope, resilience, and truth in the face of hatred. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. The book is the real-life diary of Anne Frank, a Jewish girl who went into hiding with her family during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. It's a powerful, emotional account of life in hiding and the psychological struggles of growing up under constant fear and uncertainty. The book is summarized across 7 plots. 1. Before hiding, the early diary, June-July 1942. 2. Going into hiding, July 1942. 3. Life in the Secret Annex, 1942 to 1944. 4. Anne and Peter's relationship. 5. Reflections on humanity and war. 6. The arrest, August 1944. 7. Aftermath, post-diary events. 1. Anne Frank's life before hiding, June-July 1942. This early section of the diary paints a picture of Anne as a bright, energetic, and ordinary teenage girl, full of thoughts about friends, school, boys, and her family, all while slowly becoming aware of the political dangers closing in around her. Receiving the diary. Anne receives the diary on June 12, 1942, for her 13th birthday. She names the diary Kitty, treating it like a close friend. From the beginning, she writes with intimacy, wit, and emotional honesty. I hope I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone, and I hope you will be a great source of comfort and support. This shows her deep desire for connection, even before going into hiding. Her life as a student and teenager, Anne describes being a talkative and mischievous student who often gets into trouble for chatting too much, her love for reading and writing, her close group of friends, including Jock, Lies, and San, crushes on boys like Hello Silberberg, and how she navigates friendships and love like any teenage girl. Though her diary will later become a deeply serious document, it begins with lighthearted stories about school gossip, teachers she likes or dislikes, and arguments with classmates. Family life. Anne writes about her family. Otto Frank, her father, is gentle, understanding, and Anne is closest to him. Edith Frank, her mother, tries to be a good mother, but Anne often finds her too critical or distant. Margot Frank, her older sister, is quiet, well-behaved, and academically brilliant. Anne sometimes feels overshadowed by her. Even early on, Anne reflects thoughtfully on her relationships and feelings of being misunderstood or underestimated. The rising threat, anti-Jewish measures. As the Nazi regime intensifies its occupation of the Netherlands, Anne begins to note the growing dangers for Jews. Jews must wear yellow stars. Jews are banned from trams, cinemas, public swimming pools, and parks. Jews must hand in bicycles, go to separate Jewish schools, and are forbidden from visiting non-Jewish homes. There are curfews, and Jews are forced out of jobs. Anne and her family face these humiliations and limitations daily. But at this stage, she still writes with youthful optimism, though her tone occasionally becomes more serious. Shifting realities. By July 1942, things get worse. Anne describes how her Jewish friends are disappearing, called away to work in Germany. But rumors begin to circulate that these people are actually being sent to concentration camps. The growing fear sets the stage for what comes next. Margot receives a call-up notice, prompting the Frank family to go into hiding the very next day. Anne never returns to school, and her diary shifts from teenage chatter to the gravity of survival. This early section is so important because it introduces us to Anne's bright, observant mind, gives us a snapshot of Jewish life under Nazi oppression before total collapse, lets us see the contrast between a normal teenage girl and the extraordinary challenges she will soon face. It also makes the coming events even more heartbreaking because we see just how full of life and promise Anne was. 2. Going into hiding, July 1942. 1. The call-up notice. On July 5, 1942, Anne's 16-year-old sister Margot receives a call-up notice from the Nazi SS, ordering her to report to a labor camp, a phrase Jews were learning to fear. The Franks knew this was likely a death sentence, not just work. This notice accelerated their secret plan to go into hiding, a plan that had been quietly prepared for weeks by Otto Frank and his trusted colleagues. That very night, the family decides to go into hiding the next morning. to preparing to disappear. Anne describes the chaos of packing as much as possible in a single night. She wears layers of clothing to avoid carrying a suitcase that might raise suspicion. As many clothes as I could bear, she writes. The family leaves a false trail to make it seem they fled to Switzerland. Anne notes the emotional shock of leaving her home, cat, and personal things behind forever. She feels the weight of the unknown. 3. Arriving at the Secret Annex. The Franks move into a hidden apartment inside Otto Frank's former office building at 263 Prinsengracht, Amsterdam. The entrance to the annex is cleverly concealed behind a movable bookcase. Layout of the annex: 2 floors and an attic with several small rooms. Shared kitchen, shared toilet, no shower or bath, limited privacy. Cold in winter, hot in summer. They cannot flush toilets, talk loudly, walk with shoes, or open windows during the day. Only after business hours is it safe to move more freely. Anne calls it a strange, ghostly house. 4. New residents join the Van Daan family. Arrive shortly after the Franks. Herman Van Daan, Otto's business partner, gruff and temperamental. August Van Daan, vain and often critical of Anne. Peter Van Daan, a shy 15-year-old boy who Anne finds boring at first. Tension begins early between the families. Anne observes moods swing quickly, especially as the group adapts to shared living in tight spaces. Mr. Dussel joins the group later, November 1942. A fussy, meticulous dentist shares a room with Anne, leading to many conflicts. Though he brings news of the outside world, he often criticizes Anne and has habits that annoy her. 5. Helpers in the outside world. The people who risk their lives to help the Franks and the others are everyday heroes. They include Miep Gies, kind and courageous, brings food, books, and news. Mr. Kraller, Mr. Koopfeis, and Bep Voskiel provide logistical support and protection. Anne writes with deep gratitude and admiration for these people. Without them, the people in the annex wouldn't have survived even a few weeks. 6. Anne's emotional and mental shift. In the early days of hiding, Anne begins to feel trapped and claustrophobic, miss the outside world, nature, sunlight, and friends. Notice how her relationships are changing, especially with her mother and Margot, whom she feels emotionally distant from. Start journaling even more seriously. Her diary becomes her best friend and emotional outlet. I can shake off everything as I write. My sorrows disappear, my courage is reborn. 7. The growing tension. While the group is safe for now, they live under constant fear of being discovered by the Gestapo or informants, anxiety about bombings, burglaries, and food shortages, no medical care, no freedom, and no privacy. Anne writes in her diary not just to cope, but to understand herself, to grow, to reflect, and to preserve her inner world as the outside world collapses. 3. Life in the Secret Annex, 1942 to 1944. This makes up the bulk of the diary and offers a deeply emotional and detailed view of their life in hiding. 1. Daily routine in hiding. Life in the annex is strictly structured to avoid discovery. Daytime, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., total silence. No talking, no flushing toilets, no footsteps, only whispering and sitting still. Constant fear of being overheard by workers in the warehouse below. Nighttime, time to relax slightly, walk around, wash and talk. Light chores, reading, listening to the radio, and writing in journals. Food, brought by helpers, often in short supply. Rationing leads to a dull and limited diet: beans, bread, potatoes. Anne writes often about cravings, hunger, and the joy of little luxuries like jam or butter. Anne's psychological and emotional growth. This is where we see Anne evolving from a lively girl into a thoughtful young woman. She reflects deeply on her personality, faith, and existence, struggles with loneliness, identity, and the stress of being misunderstood. She dreams of being a writer or journalist, hoping to leave something meaningful behind. In spite of the darkness around her, she writes with clarity, beauty, and hope. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. Her optimism shines even in the worst of times. 3. Conflict and isolation. Living in such cramped quarters creates intense tension. With her mother, Anne feels judged and emotionally unsupported by her mother. She writes openly about resenting her, saying they have nothing in common. She longs for a mother figure who understands and nurtures her, but finds this mostly in her father. With Mr. Dussel, she shares a room with him, and he often treats her as a child, ignoring her privacy and opinions. They argue over desk time, noise, and habits. With herself, Anne writes about the two Annes, the cheerful, funny girl everyone sees, and the deeper, more sensitive Anne that she keeps hidden, even from her family. I want to go on living even after my death. 4. Relationships in the Annex. Otto Frank, father, her emotional anchor. Anne feels safe with him and looks up to him as fair, wise, and calm. Margot Frank, sister. Quiet, intelligent, obedient, the perfect daughter. Anne admires her but also feels overshadowed by her. Their bond grows stronger over time, especially when Anne becomes more introspective. Peter Van Daan. At first, Anne finds him dull and immature. Later, they grow close. A teenage romance blossoms in the Annex. They share conversations about life, religion, parents, kisses and hugs, a sense of companionship in loneliness. But Anne eventually questions whether she truly loves him or simply needs someone to understand her. 5. News from the outside world. Anne and the others gather around the radio, illegally, to listen to BBC broadcasts for updates on the war. They hear about bombings in Germany and the Netherlands, the progress of Allied troops, hopeful events like D-Day, June 6, 1944, which fills them with optimism. At the same time, Anne writes about, the roundups of Jews in Amsterdam, stories of friends disappearing, rumors of concentration camps and gas chambers. She knows that they could be found at any moment. The diary becomes her confidant and purpose. Anne begins rewriting her diary in 1944 after hearing a Dutch government broadcast calling for people to preserve wartime letters and diaries for historical record. She hopes to publish her diary one day as a novel titled The Secret Annex. This leads to more edited, mature entries. She becomes more analytical, more refined, and her writing more literary. 7. Spiritual growth and idealism. Anne frequently questions human nature, the role of women in society, justice, war, peace, and freedom, faith, and God. Despite everything, she chooses hope. I don't think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. This is what makes her diary timeless, not just a document of war, but a meditation on life. 4. Anne and Peter's relationship. 1. Early disinterest and awkward beginnings. When the Van Daan family first arrives at the Secret Annex, Anne doesn't think much of Peter Van Pel's his real name. She finds him shy, dull, and socially awkward. At 15, Peter is reserved and insecure, especially in comparison to the lively, outspoken Anne. Anne even describes him as lazy and boring early on and prefers talking to adults over interacting with him. This distance reflects Anne's initial confidence in her identity. She doesn't yet feel the need for companionship in him. A gradual shift from strangers to confidants. In early 1944, after over a year in hiding, something begins to shift. Peter starts opening up more. Anne, now 14, is growing more introspective, thoughtful, and emotionally needy. Their loneliness draws them together. They begin to talk in the evenings, mostly in the attic. These interactions mark the beginning of a tender connection, built not on physical attraction at first, but shared vulnerability. Anne writes, I need to have someone with whom I can share everything. I miss having a real friend. 3. The blossoming of a teenage romance. As they spend more time together, Anne begins developing feelings for Peter. She confesses her attraction to him, especially his eyes, her longing for warmth, touch, and closeness, her dreams about him, and even imagines kissing him before it actually happens. They start sitting close on the divan in the attic, sharing secrets, including Anne's feelings about her family and her insecurities, kissing, gentle, affectionate, and full of teenage nervousness. This is Anne's first experience with romantic love. When he kisses me and puts his cheek against mine, I feel a glow that warms me all over. Anne's emotional complexity and self-reflection. What makes this relationship truly powerful is how deeply Anne analyzes it. She constantly asks, is this love? Am I falling for Peter or for the idea of being loved? Is Peter a kindred spirit or just someone who happens to be available? She doubts Peter's depth and emotional maturity. I don't think he's strong enough to be the person I can lean on. And yet she continues seeing him because she feels understood, even briefly. Their closeness brings comfort and meaning to her confined life. It helps her process her own emotional awakening and desires. 5. The fading connection and Anne's maturity. As the weeks pass, Anne begins to notice that Peter is passive, uncertain, and not as curious about the world as she is. She longs for someone with more intellectual connection, spiritual depth, and ambition. Her affection cools. She begins to outgrow Peter emotionally and mentally. Anne ultimately realizes, I need more than just a companion. I need a friend who understands me, someone I can admire. Still, she is grateful for what Peter gave her: comfort, closeness, and a way to explore her inner life. Hey friends, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you found this story meaningful, helpful, or even just a little thought-provoking, I'd really appreciate your support. You can hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. It really helps more than you know and lets me keep creating content like this. Thanks for being here. 5. Reflections on Humanity and War. Anne's diary isn't just a recounting of daily life in hiding. It becomes a space where she wrestles with the biggest questions of human existence. What makes people good or evil? Why do people hate others? Will justice ever prevail? What is the role of faith, hope, and love in a world filled with war? These reflections are often philosophical, spiritual, emotional, and incredibly insightful. Hope amid horror. Anne is aware of the suffering, the roundups, the disappearances, the rumors of death camps, and yet she refuses to give in to despair. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. This line, possibly the most famous quote from her diary, is not naive. It is deliberate, hopeful, and powerful. It's written after over a year in hiding, watching neighbors and friends vanish, hearing horror stories on the radio. For Anne, choosing hope is an act of quiet rebellion against the darkness of the world. She believes goodness is not dead, it's just buried. Freedom versus confinement. This is one of the central emotional contrasts in her diary. She longs for fresh air, open skies, walking in nature, being a girl again, carefree and playful, her school friends, laughter, and liberty. I long to ride a bike, dance, whistle, look at the world, feel young and free. But instead, she is trapped in silence, surrounded by fear, always waiting for a knock on the door. This longing becomes metaphorically rich. Even in confinement, her mind is free. Her words roam where her body cannot. I can shake off everything if I write. My sorrows disappear, my courage is reborn. Her diary becomes her window to freedom. War, injustice, and the absurdity of hatred. Anne isn't passive. She develops strong opinions about the stupidity of war, the brutality of fascism, the blind hatred of Jews. She wonders how such cruelty is even possible and whether humanity has learned nothing from history. What one Christian does is his own responsibility. What one Jew does is thrown back at all Jews. She critiques stereotyping, prejudice, and scapegoating, the cruelty of politics, especially Hitler's Nazi ideology, the hypocrisy of the adult world, which starts wars and calls it patriotism. Anne is mourning the loss of moral clarity and yet still tries to hold on to ethical principles. Faith, religion, and inner strength. Though born Jewish, Anne's view of God and religion becomes personal in the Annex. She reflects not just on Judaism, but on spirituality in general, on why suffering exists and whether there is a higher reason, on how faith can keep people going, even when the world seems faithless. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the suffering of millions, and yet if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right. For Anne, God is found in nature, in writing, in hope, not just in religious rituals. Her spiritual growth mirrors her emotional and intellectual maturity. Human nature, two selves, one soul. Anne often writes about the two Annes inside her, the cheerful, talkative jokester everyone sees, and the quiet, deep, anxious girl who thinks about war, injustice, and love. She believes everyone has two sides, and life is about reconciling them. I know exactly how I'd like to be, how I am on the inside, but unfortunately I'm only like that with myself. This theme, the duality of the human soul, ties into her larger questions about why some people do good and others do evil, whether we can change ourselves, whether the world can learn to be better. Conclusion: why these reflections matter. Anne's reflections on humanity and war are what make her diary timeless. She is not just recording events. She is interpreting life, even under threat of death. Through her reflections, we learn. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's choosing to write. Hope can exist without evidence. It is a choice. Love and truth are acts of defiance in a hateful world. Youth can carry more wisdom than many adults. 6. The arrest, August 1944. How were they discovered? The people in the Secret Annex had managed to remain hidden for 25 months. But on this day, the Gestapo, German secret police, arrived, likely due to a tip-off from an anonymous Dutch informant. The identity of the betrayer remains uncertain, even after decades of investigations. Some suspect a warehouse worker noticed suspicious activity. Others suggest a random inspection turned into a betrayal. Modern research has also speculated it may have been accidental or due to food ration fraud. Regardless of how, the Secret Annex was compromised. What happened during the arrest? Around 10 a.m., SS Oberscharführer Karl Silberbauer, a Gestapo officer, entered the building at 263 Prinsengracht in Amsterdam, accompanied by several Dutch police officers. Here's a reconstruction of the scene. 1. The Gestapo confronted the office workers first, forcing them to reveal the hiding place. 2. They searched behind the movable bookcase, uncovering the entrance to the annex. 3. All 8 people in hiding, Otto Frank, Edith, Margot, Anne, Hermann, August, Peter, and Fritz Pfeffer, were found and arrested. 4. 2 helpers, Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman, were also arrested. Miep Gies and Bep Voskuil were spared. They were given just a few minutes to gather their things. Anne reportedly grabbed a few items, but not her diary, which she left behind on the floor. After the arrest, a step-by-step breakdown. 1. Headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst SD. They were first taken to the Gestapo headquarters for interrogation. It was a terrifying experience, but still did not reveal who helped them. 2. Westerbork Transit Camp, August 8th, September 3rd, 1944. They were sent to Westerbork, a camp in the Netherlands used to temporarily hold Jews before deporting them to concentration camps in Eastern Europe. Because they had been in hiding, they were labeled criminal Jews and placed in the punishment block. Daily life involved hard labor dismantling batteries and electronics. Anne still held out hope. She believed that they might survive. 3. Deportation to Auschwitz, September 3rd, 1944. This was the last train to leave Westerbork for Auschwitz. Crammed into cattle cars for 3 days, they traveled in filthy, suffocating conditions. Over 1,000 people were packed onto that final transport. Upon arrival, families were separated. Men to one side, women and children to the other. Otto Frank was separated from Edith and his daughters forever. Anne and Margot were selected for labor. Edith was not, but she managed to stay close for a time before being separated later. What makes the arrest so tragic? 1. Anne had just begun to mature emotionally and spiritually. Her final diary entries are full of insight, hope, and courage. She wrote of her dreams to become a writer or journalist. Just 3 days later, she was arrested and never had the chance to write again. 2. They were so close to the end of the war. Had they survived just a few more months, they likely would have been liberated. British and American forces liberated parts of the Netherlands in the spring of 1945. 3. The diary remained hidden. After the arrest, Miep Gies, and Bep Voskuil returned to the annex. They found Anne's diary pages scattered on the floor. Miep collected them and saved them in her desk, hoping to return Anne one day. She later gave them to Otto Frank, the only survivor after learning of Anne's death. What we learn from the arrest: bravery in the face of fear. None of the helpers were betrayed. The people in hiding refused to speak of who aided them, even under duress. The fragility of hope. Even a well-organized, careful hiding place can be discovered by chance or betrayal. The importance of Anne's writing. Without the diary, we would never know her voice, her thoughts, or her heart. Final thoughts. The raid on the annex is not just a historical moment, it is the ending of a personal story, one filled with youth, wonder, anxiety, and growing maturity. A young girl trying to hold on to humanity in the face of hatred. And yet, Anne's words endured long after the world tried to silence her. One day, this terrible war will be over. The time will come when we'll be people again and not just Jews. Anne Frank, months before her arrest. The arrest and immediate aftermath. The arrest was led by SS officer Karl Silberbauer and several Dutch Nazi collaborators. All 8 people in hiding were arrested: Otto Frank, Edith Frank, Margot Frank, Anne Frank Herman, August and Peter Van Pels, the Van Dons, Fritz Pfeffer, the dentist. Alongside them, 2 helpers, Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman, were also taken into custody. The Gestapo searched the annex thoroughly and left Anne's diary behind. Transit Camp Westerbork, August 8th, September 3rd, 1944. All 8 were transported to Westerbork, a transit camp in the northeastern Netherlands. Because they had been in hiding, they were labeled criminal Jews and sent to the punishment barracks. Life was harsh. They worked long hours dismantling batteries and radios. Anne and her sisters still hoped they might survive. Deportation to Auschwitz. September 3rd, 1944, the last transport from Westerbork to Auschwitz. The train carried 1,019 Jews packed into cattle cars. The journey took 3 days in extreme conditions. Upon arrival, men and women were separated. Otto Frank was separated from his wife and daughters. It was the last time he saw them. Edith, Anne, and Margot remained together in the women's camp. In Auschwitz, conditions were horrific: starvation, cold, violence, disease. Anne and Margot survived the initial selection as they were still strong enough to work. Edith Frank, already frail, was left behind and died of starvation in January 1945. Transfer to Bergen-Belsen. October 1944, Anne and Margot were transferred from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp in Germany, as the Nazis began evacuating camps ahead of the approaching Soviet army. Conditions were even worse in Bergen-Belsen. Overcrowded, freezing, disease-ridden, the sisters caught typhus along with thousands of others during a massive outbreak in early 1945. Eyewitnesses later said that Anne and Margot lay in the freezing barracks, weak, covered in lice, and delirious from fever. Margot died first, likely from a fall from her bunk due to weakness. Anne died days later, likely in February or March 1945, just weeks before the camp was liberated by the British on April 15th. Otto Frank, the sole survivor. Otto Frank was liberated by Soviet forces at Auschwitz on January 27, 1945. After the war, he returned to Amsterdam, learning gradually that his wife had died, his daughters had not survived. He was devastated, especially after hearing Anne had been alive until just weeks before liberation. Discovery and publication of the diary. After the arrest, Miep Gies, one of the helpers, returned to the secret annex and found Anne's notebooks, loose diary pages, rewritten drafts. Anne had been editing her diary to publish after the war. Miep preserved everything, hoping one day to return it to Anne. When Otto returned and learned of Anne's death, Miep gave him the papers. He was deeply moved, especially by, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." He compiled the diary, edited it lightly, and sent it to publishers. In 1947, it was published in Dutch as Het Achterhuis, the Secret Annex. The diary's global impact. Since then, the diary of a young girl has become a universal symbol of the Holocaust, a testament to human resilience, hope, and the voice of the young. Translated into over 70 languages, read by millions, and taught in schools worldwide. Adapted into films, plays, and memorial exhibitions. Anne Frank, who longed to be a writer, achieved her dream, but at the cost of her life.